It seems a bit early in the channel's lifespan to be having a best games of the year list, but it is the end of the year, and there was a lot of really good games this year. I would have liked for there to have been more of a buffer, but I guess you're going to be getting pure, unleaded opinion right out of the gate. In case you haven't deduced it, this whole video is going to be almost entirely unscripted, mainly because, one, it's super late. I'm actually recording this 3 days before Christmas. And two, considering how strong my feelings are on all the games represented, I should be able to at least justify myself somewhat off the top of my head. Before we get to the list proper, there are a couple of, runners-up that I want to mention that don't quite qualify for the best of the year list for reasons I'll get to in a second, but are still too much of a net positive for me to not at least give them their due. Yes, it only took Capcom a decade and change to get around to it, but they finally not only bought over the second Ace Attorney Investigations game, they even gave us a nifty little port of the first one just for funsies. Throw in a bunch of bonus materials and some new visual overlays, and it makes for a fairly good value proposition. Obviously, this is going to be the most exciting to people like me who've been waiting for a very long time to complete their collection. But the Investigations games are interesting enough on their own that they could be heartily recommended to anyone who's gotten into the series with all the recent Switch ports. The rip-roaring adventures of Miles Edgeworth and Dick Gumshoe provide an interesting contrast to the normal Ace Attorney formula, even if on occasion the mechanics can be somewhat obtuse. But then again, I guess that's the whole series in general. If you were interested in the series but didn't want to go to the effort of hunting down an old DS copy of the first game, or if you're someone who's just been waiting to complete their shelf forever, it's a good way to get one last hit of the series before you begin the interminable wait for an official announcement of a new installment. I don't even think I need to explain this one that much. I mean, it's the Marvel vs. Capcom games. For a certain age of gamer, these were the fighting games of their time. And even if they've aged a bit, they're still tremendously fun to play. So making a affordable collection on modern consoles that just says, here, just have all of them to play whenever you want is not only financially a no-brainer, but a blessing for everyone who's been waiting for there to be an official way to buy these games for probably nigh on 20 years now. I myself am probably classified more as a Marvel vs. Capcom 3 guy, since that was the one that came out and was super popular when I was in college, but I do still have an old, well-worn copy of MVC2 for the PS2 and MVC1 for the original PlayStation. And in the past few years, I've kind of been feeling a bit of an attachment to old 2D fighters in general, so this couldn't have gone better for me. If I did have one complaint, then maybe it would be that we do lose out on all the little bells and whistles that were added to the home ports, but I do understand them wanting to have these games as they were in their golden forms in the arcades. Add in a stellar bunch of bonus material, sketches, music, all this cool behind-the-scenes stuff. Oh, and the Punisher's here too. And you have one of the absolute best collections of its kind to be released in years. So you might have already caught on to the common theme between these two things, and it's that they're not necessarily new games, just collections of old ones. Now, they're extremely appreciated collections of old games that were otherwise impossible to get your hands on, or at the very least extremely difficult, extremely frustrating, but they are still not new products. The games themselves are completely unaltered. They play exactly like they played when they first came out. They are not new creations. Now, this whole point is probably going to get a little bit of challenge because there's a certain game on my best of the year list that kind of runs into the same problem, but I'll explain what I think the difference is in that one when I get to it. So with the pre-show out of the way, let's come out of the gate swinging. Kind of a journey with Tekken 8 this year. At first, I absolutely loved it. I enjoyed the story mode, I enjoyed the quest mode, I played matches online and got my shit pressed in completely, but that's kind of just me with fighting games in general. But then all that nonsense with the season pass started happening, and it really soured me on the game there for a while. Badly handled DLC is a real easy way to get me to turn on a game real quick, but facts are facts, and the fact is, Tekken 8 is the most fun I've had with a Tekken game since 5 back on the PlayStation 2. The game looks like a dream, the music is up to the typical high standards, and each system is well implemented enough that it adds a lot of real spice to combat, while not being too complicated to the point where a Luddite like me doesn't know what he's doing. It's probably pound for pound the best fighting game on the market right now, which I know is a really strong statement, but I mean, you can't argue with quality. Desertland is probably the most what-the-hell game on this list in terms of it not really being something that reviewed particularly well or sold particularly well. And the following statement probably isn't going to make the case any better, but Sandland is a game that is much better than you think it would be. Much better than it should be. And that kind of comes down to what it is. It's a Namco Bandai anime licensed game based off of a manga/anime that isn't particularly popular or well known, so you kind of think that they would have just farted this out and tossed it out the door, and who knows, maybe that's exactly what they did, but for some reason, this one really hit me well. The late Akira Toriyama's art style really gives the whole game a strong visual identity. The vehicles are delightfully ramshackle, the buildings are wonderfully run down, the sand remarkably sandy. The character designs, while not super complicated, are bright and expressive. You got an evolving hub town. Everyone loves a good evolving hub town. You have a cast of strange supporting characters to meet. And the standard gameplay loop, questing to get more parts for your own vehicles and creating ever stronger versions of various buggies, bikes, and tanks, is enough to keep you motivated well beyond when the environment might prove to be a little bit less than inspiring. Although I do give Sandland points for at least not being another tropical island or urban setting with random tasks strewn everywhere and the occasional NPC. In this case, it's a desert with random tasks strewn everywhere and the occasional NPC. Tanks, jumping bots, hovercrafts, full-on cat mechs all provide fun and unique ways to approach most battle tasks, even if on occasion you come across something that clearly is intended for one vehicle over another. Our heroes are suitably likable, our villains are suitably hateable, and while the plot isn't some great epic of our time, it is enough to keep you invested, and as shameful as it might be to admit, there actually was a later game plot twist involving a couple of the main characters that I, for some reason, just did not see coming. Maybe I wasn't giving the game enough credit. It of course has some very glaring flaws. Fun as vehicle combat is, hand-to-hand combat is extremely shallow, but luckily you don't have to engage in it all that much. And probably as a function of the budget, but they really did not record enough voice lines for all the traveling you're doing. I probably heard Rao and Beelzebub say the exact same thing to each other about advice for surviving in the desert and the various things that demons do to cause mischief, probably close to 150 times within the same 8-hour span of gameplay. The game came out very shortly after Akira Toriyama died, so that might have something to do with why I am so receptive to it, although at this point I'm kind of just backhanding my compliments. It's not the grandest experience, but it's got heart and the sauce where it counts, kind of like a really ugly plate of food from a really good ma and pa restaurant. Real talk though, is this what I've been missing all this time? I've actually yet to play games from either of the Constituent series that people say this is a crossbreed of, the Tactics Ogre games and the Fire Emblem games. Although I do have a copy of Fire Emblem Birthright that a friend bought me a long time ago, and I'm pretty sure I played Ogre 64 at some point when I was little, although this would have been so long ago that I have no idea what I even did in it. I'm getting a little distracted now, so to get back on track, let me simply state that Unicorn Overlord fucks, and it fucks really, really hard. To the point where I even platinumed the game to squeeze every last bit of juice out of it, which is extremely rare for me. I'm pretty sure I've only platinumed like 6 games in my entire life. As a longtime Vanillaware fan, the standard of quality doesn't surprise me too much. The game is absolutely gorgeous to look at, taking the moving painting aesthetic that Vanillaware has been working on for the past decades and pushing it to its furthest extent yet. Rising to meet the visuals is an equally strong soundscape, with a gorgeous orchestral soundtrack and a remarkably strong voice cast, consisting of a lot of voice actors that I frankly have never even heard before. All this combines to make the game feel really fresh and lively in a way that a lot of other games of its type don't. The tactical gameplay, with its seemingly infinite variations of unit types, squad combinations, equipment, skills, and unique individual units, is tailor-made to foster obsession in a very specific kind of player, which is I don't really have a brain for that kind of stuff, or at least not as much as I used to, but I was still able to get pretty far by keeping unit counters in mind while paying a lot of attention to my formations and party makeups. And the plot, with its political machinations and ancient conspiracies, is not the deepest or most profound thing ever made, but is still more than strong enough to keep you paying attention until the end. Said story is buoyed by an extremely large and diverse cast of characters, every one of which has at least something interesting about them, or some good interaction either with the main characters or with each other. The bond system allows everyone to have at least one interesting moment or one interesting thing to do, and keeps everyone from becoming just one big faceless mass of artwork. Although considering how many characters there are, some definitely have more heft to them than others. On one end of the spectrum you have, although those atrocities were committed when my will was not my own, the shame I feel for them is very real indeed. While on the other end there's, hey, do you like cake? I like cake. We should all eat more cake. You want some cake right now? I'm baking some. Come inside. Regardless, the game oozes personality, and its many positive qualities are polished to a near mirror shine. This one was actually a pretty strong competitor for my overall favorite of the year. But still, even though it didn't hit that particularly lofty goal, it is an excellent game. One that's made me reconsider certain parts of my backlog, that's definitely for certain. The best thing I could immediately say about Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance is that it is, without a doubt, the game that we should have gotten a couple of years ago. And the worst thing I could say about Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance is that it is the game we should have gotten a couple of years ago. It actually feels kind of weird bad-mouthing the game at this point because I've actually been a pretty hardcore stan for it since its release. Yes, the complaints hold complete merit. It performs terribly on its console of choice, the Switch. The plot is more of a sketch than an actual planned-out thing, and the characters are almost to a one barely developed, but an exceptionally strong core gameplay loop, the series' typical bleak, moody, and unique atmosphere, and one of the absolute best soundtracks in gaming. Yes, I know exactly what I just said. It means that even for all of its flaws, it was definitely my favorite game of the year it came out. But even with all that out there, Vengeance is so immediately and obviously the better, more fully realized creation that, while I can't necessarily say it makes the plot of the original obsolete, it certainly makes that initial incarnation of it completely outmoded. I mean, Jesus, where do I even start? Tons of gameplay tweaks make the actual moment-to-moment combat and grind and traversal of the environment tremendously more enjoyable and smooth. The game looks astoundingly better than its initial incarnation. It's not even that they changed the graphics or anything, but the increased draw distance and the smooth frame rate allows the already stellar art direction of the game to really pop the way it should have in the first place. As for that soundtrack, well, what happens when you take one of the best soundtracks ever put in a game and just say, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're just going to throw another couple dozen incredible all-time bangers in there and see what happens. This game has dozens of battle themes, environmental themes, character themes, and not a single one of them misses. It's astounding. Oh wait, sorry. There might be one small portion of one of the environments where the music is not that impressive. It's grim and ambient one moment and high energy and catchy the next. It's really something to listen to. But it's the plot and the characters that really experience the greatest glow-up. The plot is, while not the most exceptionally deep and interesting thing ever, a structured thing that I can actually get invested in now, and that I actually am aware of what's happening from moment to moment, instead of just having the characters check in at the beginning and end of an area. The heady philosophical dilemmas and moral hand-wringing that defines the series so well has arrived in full force, and I couldn't be happier. Meanwhile, the characters, Jesus Christ, they weren't even characters before. They were like a collection of 3, maybe 4 traits that talked for maybe 5 minutes out of an entire 70-hour game. Characters like Tao and especially Yuzuru, who had next to nothing to do in the original game or no discernible goals or ambitions or development, now have fully planned out character arcs, helped along by the fact that, especially in Tao's case, they'll actually travel with you for select portions of the game, fighting alongside you, gaining experience, gathering levels, but most importantly, being able to actually react to story events and character developments in real time, to comment on them or have dialogue with each other about what their feelings are and the events as they unfold. They're not now these icons of great story and character writing, but I actually care about them and their arcs, and I care about if they're going to survive events, or what's going to happen to them, or which one's going to fall into corruption, or which one's going to make a terrible decision. And that is so far beyond the absolute non-shits that I gave about them in the original game. So considering this is the refined, ideal form of a game that already stands as one of my favorites of the past decade, it should be a shoo-in to be my absolute game of the year, right? Well, this is where we kind of go back to that thing I mentioned offhand in the opening about having to disqualify games because they were just ports of old games. See, Vengeance is not a port of an old game. It has a tremendous amount of new content in it, and a tremendous amount of new story content, gameplay content, that warps the experience into something completely different from its original version. However, while the organs and the skin might be different, the bones of the game, the skeleton upon which it all lays, is still something I've played before. If I give you a slice of DiGiorno, and then a fresh slice from a New York pizzeria, while there's definitely qualitative differences, and one of them is definitely the far better realization of the thing, they are still both fundamentally pizza. I think you guys get my point. Still, with this, 5 as an installment writ large can now stand proud and shoulder to shoulder with the other mainline installments. Something I can unambiguously now recommend to anyone who likes their JRPGs grim and nasty and weird. Oh no, shock of shocks. 30-something white guy is a Dragon Ball fan and has opinions on Sparking Zero. I started out really loving the game, then I got sick of it for a few weeks, then I came back to it and I loved it again, and now I'm at a pretty good place with it. Get one of my big thoughts out there. I don't think this one's going to have the same staying power as the Tenkaichi games from back on the PS2, of which I was a huge fan, particularly the second one is one of my favorite games ever, even though 3 is obviously the better game. It just lacks some sort of a ephemeral oomph, some sort of vim that the latter 2 games in that trilogy had that just isn't present here, or at least isn't as present as it should be. Everything feels weirdly light. Combos feel light, strong hits feel like they aren't quite as booming and powerful as they did back in the day. I fully confess that this might very well be an issue with me and not the game. I find that the blocking and counter mechanics are somewhat stiffer and less immediately usable for me, and I end up in a frustrating cycle of having my shit constantly countered before I could really pick up steam and get a good, comfortable combo going. Although, then again at that point, aren't I just complaining about a game having challenge? Anyway, you might be wondering at this point, well, if this is on your list of your favorite games, why are you just bad-mouthing it? Well, that's because it's still a Dragon Ball Arena fighter. It's still super fun to play, it still looks great, even if the character models can get a little wonky sometimes. It's still super high speed with a lot of characters to choose from. The moment-to-moment combat feels great. I mean, if it wasn't fun, it wouldn't be so frustrating when things go sideways. Well, the lack of a lot of real single-player content out of the story mode is kind of a bummer, and said story mode only focuses on a very small selection of characters. The large amount of battles overall, combined with some very interesting what-if scenarios, managed to give story mode a little bit of flavor that otherwise would have been lacking in a more straightforward interpretation of the storyline. And really, I could sit here and try to continue to sell you on the game's objective qualities, but for me, the truth is, I'm an easy mark for Dragon Ball games. I always have been, ever since I played the first Budokai back on the PS2. There will always be a baseline of enjoyment I will get out of these games as long as I can fly around as my favorite characters and blow up a few cityscapes. And for that purpose, for nourishment for the fanboy inside of me, Sparking Zero does its job nicely. This is another one of those come-from-behind games. If you had asked me just 6 months ago if I had any interest at all in the full version of the pack-in game for the PlayStation 5, I probably would have shrugged and said, maybe when it's on sale. To be clear, I actually rather liked Astro's Playroom. I thought it was a very cute game, very fun, with a lot of fun references and good cheer, but I really wasn't interested in seeing a full-length version of it. As a matter of fact, I didn't even know if it was going to succeed, really, because What works in a short tech demo sort of sense might not work as a foundation for its own full game. So is Astrobot the way in the light, like it's been sort of propped up to be by the gaming press? No. Is it better than the old guard of platformers, like the Mario games, or the Donkey Kong Countries, or the Banjo-Kazooies? No, probably not. Is it going to change the face of gaming forever? Has it changed the face of gaming forever? No, not at all. But is Astrobot an extremely good platformer? One positively dripping in quality, with a near constant stream of good, innovative, and fun platforming ideas, and a nearly boundless well of good humor and charm that makes every moment playing it just an extremely enjoyable experience. Yes, that part is true. I know there's a lot of sort of hand-wringing over whether or not Astrobot is a cynical cash grab from an increasingly money-grubbing and out-of-touch Sony, or if it's an honest, earnest project that happens to come from a studio that is under a rather nasty at the moment umbrella. I think it's definitely the latter. I think Team Asobi has a real love for PlayStation as a brand, as a history, and it really comes through in the game with its playful and enthusiastic approach to PlayStation as a universe. It's really hard to take off those jade-colored glasses, especially after the year we've had in the world of gaming, but I do think this is one of the good ones, and if you can maybe pry them off your eyes for a little while, I think there's a lot to really enjoy here, even if we might look back on it one day as eerily prescient of the new age of brand slop. But for now, I'm content to enjoy my cute robot platformer, scuzzy overlords or no. As much as I enjoyed every game that I've talked about, and I really did enjoy them tremendously, when you're as tired as I tend to be, getting the energy to even finish something means that there was something in it that really stuck with you. Still, as great as all these were, there was really only ever one winner for me, and I knew it from the moment that I finished it. A game that I got such profound enjoyment out of that my only regret is that I can't go back and experience it again from the beginning. It's one of those games that kind of hits you from behind. Like, I knew I was going to enjoy it, but I didn't anticipate just how much I would get out of the experience. My game of the year could only be... Okay, first off, I do want to put a little context here, because I feel like saying this is your game of the year gives the person listening to you a very specific sort of impression of who you are. Truth be told, I'm not one of these super hardcore Final Fantasy VII nuts. Oh, don't get me wrong, I love the game. I mean, I grew up in the 90s, I played it, blew my mind. I've had tons of enthusiastic discussions down the years about the characters and the plot and the symbolism. And at this point, I've probably beaten it a good 4 or 5 times. But be it because other Final Fantasies hit me in a more personal place, or dilution of the plot and characters because of the compilation installments, over time I kind of fell out of love with the game. Well, falling out of love is putting it a bit strong. I guess the best way to put it would be to say that sometimes, depending on when you asked me, it wasn't even my top 5 Final Fantasies. So it was when Remake was announced back in the day. My reaction was sort of mild interest. I mean, of course it was a cool thing that this was even happening at all. People have been asking for this since I was little. People have been asking for this since like 2 years after the game came out. But it really wasn't on my radar all that much. I knew I'd get around to it eventually, but it wasn't a priority. Until suddenly, like a month before it came out, and all of a sudden my interest spiked and I decided to get it. I ended up having to wait a month because of early pandemic shipping issues. But I got the game, I played it, and I absolutely loved it. Visually, it was one of the most incredible games I had ever seen, jokes about doors and skyboxes notwithstanding. Audio-wise, the voice cast was great, and the music was absolutely stellar, modernizing some of the old tracks wonderfully while adding in some really good, really emotionally resonant new ones. Midgar went from already being an extremely interesting and memorable environment in the original to feeling like a fully fleshed out, living and breathing place. And I would definitely count it as one of the best settings I've ever seen in a video game, even though it's technically only one small part of a much bigger world. But enough glazing Remake, I'm actually here to glaze Rebirth. And while I do understand some people's misgivings about it, that it's bloated, that its story is a little bit shaky, that it perhaps sacrifices certain emotional peak moments from the original game to further its own plot machinations. Yet in the face of everything I enjoyed about the game, I just can't help but regard those as more nitpicks than anything. Combat, already a highlight of Remake that I just realized I forgot to even mention when I was talking about it, has been super energized, in tune with the generally faster and more frenetic pace of battle. And speaking of the pace of battle, the sheer wealth of options at your disposal, specialized material lineups, magic, normal combat options, synergies, summons, spread out over 7 characters with extremely diverse fighting styles, makes it so that even 90 hours in, you're still discovering new things to do. Visually, the game is just as much of a marvel as its predecessor. Character models are even cleaner and more expressive. Environments look fantastic. Towns and cities and villages look real and lived in, like they're actual places as opposed to just stops on your journey that are supposed to act as background decoration, leading to a rich and fully realized universe. I know that this is something that was a common complaint about the game, like I mentioned back at the beginning of this segment, and to an extent I do understand it. But maybe it's because this came out at around a time when the nickel and diming of companies for every last little bit of content was really starting to grate on me, but the sheer volume, the sheer embarrassment of riches that is the amount of stuff to do in this game was definitely a benefit, not a deficit for me. Although in the interest of honesty, I will admit that I did run out of steam on some of the long-term quests that the game had towards the end, especially the Proto-Relic quest, which I realized had a series of extremely difficult boss battles left to do, and I just sort of ran out of patience and left to finish up the main storyline. Still, I'd rather be gorged to bloatation than starved for things to do. And the soundtrack, holy Jesus, the soundtrack. Let me tell you, man, it's earned all of those best OST awards it's gotten. That really is unparalleled. It's one of the absolute crowning achievements of video game music, and I know I just, like 10 minutes ago, was saying the same thing about Vengeance, and I promise I'm not someone who's prone to hyperbole or to saying that this is the best thing ever, or that's the best thing ever. It just so happens that we're in a year with 2 really strong contenders for all-time great music. I have to emphasize the difference between the 2 of them with my complete lack of musical knowledge or terminology. I'd say that Vengeance's soundtrack is more about creating an atmosphere, sort of a mood to any given scene, while Rebirth's is more about imbuing a scene or a setting or an event or an environment, really anything you could think of, with a feeling, with emotion. Complex interweaving melodies that feature character motifs and environmental motifs and group motifs, all weaving in and out of each other to make sure that you feel a scene as much as you see it, or hear it. But even with all that incredible stuff I just mentioned, it's not the thing that really kept me coming back for more. Believe it or not, it's the characters. To put it as simply and subjectively as possible, I tremendously enjoy almost every single character in this game. I enjoy playing as them. I enjoy watching them develop and change in response to the plot. I enjoy watching them bounce off of each other, especially enjoy watching them bounce off each other and their dynamics as a group change. The character writing in this game, and the personality that it imbues each character with, is so strong that even more than the combat or the exploration, the chance to just have more adventures with them, to spend more time with them, is really the best part of it. And yes, I know, oh, they're written like anime characters, or oh, they occasionally say cringe thing, but that's the magic of a cast with really good chemistry. It's a knock-on effect for the plot. For the record, the plot of Rebirth is actually quite good, and quite interesting all the way through. Not just for the ways it's different, but for the way it integrates old events in new contexts. But because I care so much about the cast and what happens to them, I therefore care about the plot. I want things to work out for them. And so I'm invested in every way it's possible for one to be invested in a game's story, which, as anyone will tell you, is of incalculable importance to a good RPG. I could go on and on about what I feel are this game's objective qualities, but I think the most succinct way to explain what this meant to me is to say that it was literally all I could think about playing until I finished it. Oh, I gotta wake up for work in the morning? Well, I could still spare like 45 minutes to knock out some Rebirth. Oh, I gotta catch a train in an hour? I guess that's an hour of Rebirth time. It's the kind of fixation that you don't get very often for a game as you get older, where even when you're at your job or you're doing something else, you're just so jazzed to be able to finish so you could get home and play some more. That's that magical shit that gaming as a hobby is built on, and it's exactly that shit that was pumped into my veins by this game. So yes, without a doubt, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was my absolute favorite game of the year. And while I understand and acknowledge all problems that people had with it, like I said, man, nitpicks. The tiniest, most insignificant nits that you could possibly pick. And that's it. Wow, this ended up much, much longer than I intended it to be. It was supposed to be a nice, quick video that I could pound out before Christmas and have something good on the channel to end the year out on, but hey man, whatever. Games are awesome, and I like talking about them. So have a happy holiday, have a happy new year, and I'll see you in 2025. I'm gonna sleep now, and probably not wake up for a few weeks.